being a genuine world leader in the area and the issues that we're going to be talking about, and that the program and the seminar series is intended to address. So we're very, very pleased that Gavin is here. We're also pleased to use this opportunity to announce that we're developing, UUK developing a joint program with the Open Data Institute, and the aims of the program really to sort of develop some capacity, to develop some tools and services that institutions, that universities can use to make the most of and exploit the opportunities around open data. It's still in a formative phase, but we do have a number of universities that have already signed up to this in principle, and that includes Oxford, Aberdeen and Edinburgh have all agreed to take part of it and contribute to it, and we're in discussions with a number of others as well. And we will be circulating more information about that program, I think, after this session. But if you say a bit about the format for today at the end, but if you wanted to talk to either myself or to Will or indeed to Gavin at the end of the meeting, then there'll be an opportunity to do that. Before I hand over to Gavin, I just want to say a little bit about our own interest in this area as UUK. We've been developing a program around data and open data in particular over the past 12 months. And it's partly driven by the interest of our members as a membership organisation. They're aware of this and want to get to grips with the issue, but it's also driven by our dialogue, our close dialogue and interaction with government and various government agencies and departments who are interested in this and pushing this agenda forward. And our own thinking, I think, is focused on three particular areas. The first of these is efficiency, how you can use data and open data in particular to generate more efficiency. Second, quite a specific issue for the sector is around student recruitment and retention, which I think possibly links to some of the wider policy changes we've seen and institutional strategies. And then the third one is open access to research, which is itself a kind of massive agenda that we've had some engagement with, and we know other organisations and other parties are similarly engaged with that as well. And I think it's our view, we think that the potential for the sector to make gains in these areas and others is very substantial, and that's why we wanted to set up this program to help sort of disseminate some information and get some engagement from practitioners around this. So we're going to be running our own work on this over the next sort of 12, 24, 36 months, and we see this event and the program that we're developing as very much as the start of that, because we don't think this is an agenda that's going to go away. In terms of this particular session this evening, we want to make it as informal and discursive as possible. There's a select group of people who are invited to take part in this today, and we hope there'll be plenty of opportunities for questions and answers after Gavin's talk, and also there will be some refreshments at the end. So do please kind of stay around and talk to your colleagues and talk to us about any issues that are raised, any questions that you're on your mind. Gavin's talk is also going to be streamed live on YouTube, but the Q&A session won't be filmed, so you can have confidence about that. So we'll cut the filming off after that, so you don't need to worry about that. And I think with that, that's all I wanted to say by way of introduction, and I'm very pleased indeed to hand over to Gavin.
Okay, thank you very much. So my name is Gavin Starks. I'm the Chief Exec of the Open Data Institute. I'd like to start today just giving you a bit of an overview of who the ODI are, where we've come from, then talk about what we see as the opportunity of open data worldwide, and then speak about some specific things that we are working on. I think just to set the scene, the ODI, we're a non-profit, independent company, limited by guarantee, based in Shoreditch in London. We're incredibly fortunate to have Sir Tim Berners-Lee and Sir Nigel Shadbolt as our co-founders and president and chairman, respectively. We also get significant funding from UK governments. We get £2 million a year to set up. We've been going for 18 months, so it's been quite a journey over those first 18 months. We've seen a huge amount of interest in the world, from around the world, around open data. But just to start with some terminology clarity, you will hear a lot about big data, personal data, open data. We hear about it, we read about it all the time, and there is a vast amount of confusion that exists out in the world about what these things are. Just want to be clear about what we see them as. So from the ODI's perspective, open data is data that is published and licensed openly, free for any use by anyone. And that's a very clear definition. It's an explicit license to say you can use this information for any purpose without charge. In contrast, personal data, so your personal health records, for example, are not open data. You could choose to make them open, but they are not open data in our definition. There's a lot of confusion between the notion of open and the notion of sharing. So you can share data under certain licensing frameworks, which is the way a lot of the world works today. And big data, I really wish would go away as a phrase. I used to work in astrophysics. It feels like big data has been around forever, and it's just, I think the definition of big data is bigger than you're used to in whatever field that you're working in. So just having set that sort of set those definitions out, I think I'd like to just reflect on what we see as the scale of opportunity here. Now, I've taken liberty here in that we're in the 25th anniversary year of the web this year, and one frame of reference I found very useful, particularly when talking to politicians or non-technology people, is to think about what we've built over the last 25 years as a web of documents. We haven't really wired up the data that underpins the world in a really linkable, shareable way. And so when we think about what the potential is here, and I've taken a rather arbitrary starting point of the launch of data.gov.uk as the kind of starting point for the web of data. You could pick your own metric, but I think the conditions exist today that we're seeing a real shift. So last year you had the G8 signed an open data charter. You had an executive order from Obama saying that all federal data should be open and machine readable. Seeing that in a presidential edict is quite, I find it quite surprising. The G20 is considering what it's going to do in relation to that open data charter later on this year, and the Open Government Partnership, which represents about 80 countries worldwide, has been working hard on trying to create open government as a sort of category of which open data plays a key part. So for me, it feels very much like the mid-90s web all over again. There's lots of excitement. Nobody really knows what it is or why or what the potential might be, but there's lots of excitement. And the big difference is this time, instead of it being driven by kind of grassroots technology, kind of technology innovation, it's also being driven by the political spectrum, transparency as a public good. And that's a kind of bit of political rhetoric we've heard over and over. I was over at the World Bank earlier this year, and the president of the World Bank was saying open data is critical to the future of international development. So there's a lot of kind of political air cover here, and I would say a lot of people do know what they mean when they say that, and a lot of people don't. And I'd say broadly, everybody is also working it out. So why do we think this is important? I certainly think that we're not going to scale as a society without open data. I can't imagine how you're going to build a smart city without open data. How do you know where all the energy, water, services, transportation, health services, education, etc. exist within a city without it being openly usable by everyone? And one scenario here is to think about, what happens if you have some kind of disaster in a city. So let's say a hurricane hits a major city, or a typhoon hits a country. What do you do in response to that? Or a helicopter hits a crane in the middle of London. You've got 15 minutes to respond to say, okay, tell me where everybody is, where the emergency services are, is it a terrorist attack, and so on. How do you actually bring all of that information together pretty much in real time to answer those kind of questions? So I just want to rattle through some examples now of what I mean by data, because the data isn't particularly well defined either. This isn't by no means an exhaustive list, but when we talk about social data, we could be talking about education, we could be talking about law, we could be talking about your personal data shadow that you choose to make open and put into the general commons. You could talk about crime information or housing. When you talk about environmental data, it could be maps. You'd like to think that all our maps were open, but they're not. You could look at climate information, flooding data. I had a very interesting call from Cabinet Office earlier this year when the country was flooding, saying, "Where's our data?" And well, it's actually closed. You have to buy it. So how does somebody somewhere build an app that tells you when your house is going to flood, at the same time as an insurance company can actually give you a decent premium based on your actual environmental conditions? So this kind of ranges through to farming. It ranges through to materials scarcity. All of these pieces are really significant. And then you look at economic data. So that could be corporate ownership, it could be tax information, it could be peer-to-peer lending, it could be procurement information. Right the way through to stranded assets. When we start mashing together some of the climate policy pieces with what's going to happen to those assets over time, there will be a huge impact on the financial ecosystem based on our environmental, hopefully on some of our environmental policies if they stick. So I want to give some examples now. One of the things that we do at the ODI is we incubate companies, and our first cohort of 10 companies over the last year, they've closed about £2.5 million worth of business, now employ 50 people between them. One of the projects that they identified was looking at prescriptions. So in the UK, the health service publishes all the prescriptions issued on a monthly basis. So this is the name of the drug, how much it cost, and the region. It's not the name of the patient, again, not personal data. And they looked at one class of drugs called statins, and they said, well, how many people could be switched from the patented drug to the generic? Price difference is £20 versus 70 pence. So they worked with clinicians, they took out all the use cases where you need the patented drug. How much money could we save? Well, it's about £200 million a year. And what would happen if you scaled that to all the different drug classes? Well, it could be over £1 billion a year. And the map that's on the screen here is the hotspots, which areas of the country are prescribing more patented drugs than generics. So you can see it's unlikely that there's a clinical reason why that the northeast of the country and the... Oh, sorry. There we go. Thank you. Do point that out. So the map here, the hotspots that are more red are the areas of the country where there's more patented drugs prescribed than generics. And so it's difficult to believe there's a big clinical difference between some of those bordering territories, given that the delineation is fairly arbitrary. So next step of that will be to work on a behavior change program to work out why this is the case. Is it down to the sales routes of the pharma companies? Is it down to the surgeries that happen to have dispensing chemists with them? Is it just ignorance? Is it misinformation? What is the root cause there, and how can we move that project forward? So another example is a company that we incubate called Open Corporates. They've got data for over 60 million companies worldwide. They've done a beneficial ownership map of all the American banks. So the map here that you're looking at is Goldman Sachs, and the countries are resized to where the greatest number of subsidiaries are. So the large blob at the bottom here is the Cayman Islands. The other large blob on the right, which is slightly obscured, is is Luxembourg. And so as you go through the different banks here, you can see quite a radical difference between where they have the greatest number of parent or subsidiary companies. And you can map that for every single legal entity. And they can now do this for most large corporates. So when you're starting to look at where does information, where is the funding flow, what corporate hierarchies exist that may or may not be more tax beneficial to others, this starts to give you some insight into that. And again, this is combining data from huge PDF files, from public data, from Companies House, a real mess of data underneath the hood that they brought together. Another example, looking at peer-to-peer lending across the UK. So there's a whole range of companies that enable you to lend to small companies. The lending, unsurprisingly, most of the lending was done from the southeast, but the borrowing was actually uniform across the country. And it's about £400 million a year. And what the data told us is that the uniformity of the borrowing indicated that the high street banks are basically not lending to that part of the market, and it's being fulfilled by this peer-to-peer lending market. And here all of the different peer-to-peer lenders came together and shared their data, and then we helped to produce the underlying analytics. We then had a great follow-on meeting with the high street banks, and a nice feisty thing where they said they didn't believe a word of it. They said, well, we can go and have a look at the data. Similarly, looking at cash flow across the public spending across Europe. For some reason, the UK is very slow at receiving money out of Europe, and other countries like Poland are really quick at receiving money out of Europe. We've got an average of latency of about 9 months to receive money after the tenders have gone through the process. So the question was, once we've done these kind of bits of analytics, is so how do we work out why this is the case? And in this case, we managed to get enough coverage that the EU, so that would help, that the EU decided they would release the next level of data down, so that will enable the next level of analytics into the what is causing this sort of cash delay. And this was, in context, £22 billion of cash to the UK, 700 million of which was to SMEs. So a 9-month delay cash flow to SMEs is pretty material. So the next bit of research there is to bring that together. Again, 350,000 EU tenders, 38 million UK transactions, 1.8 million documents, lots of very messy data. And one final example here is looking at fire station closures in London. So the Mayor's office published their report about which fire stations they were going to close, lots of public anxiety about, well, what does that mean for my area? So we built a tool that enables you to close your own fire stations, and then it gives you the response time here on the left-hand side based on that closure. Not just looking at the methodology and underlying data that the local authorities use, but combining that with data from Telefonica around footfall. So we took the mobile data, 600 million location records, to look at the population density during the day. Because just simply looking at what the population density of where people are living gives you a partial picture. In some areas of London, the population may go up by an order of magnitude as people come to work and go home again. So that's factored into the analytics. Again, this is all published as open data, so not only the policymakers and the politicians can go in and look at it, but individual citizens can as well. And we feel it's a really good example of citizen engagement, because actually you go through most of them and it doesn't make that much difference to the response time. So a lot of the anxiety about why should my local fire station be closed, it's been here for 50 years, actually this can give you some of the confidence that everything's okay. So and then finally this is a barometer looking worldwide that we do with the Web Foundation as to what's the sort of readiness around the world of countries publishing open data. I'd say the UK is very far ahead here, although I'll go into exactly how far ahead you can be from a very low bar to begin with as we go through. So just to pause at this point, I think it's worth reflecting, and we do this daily, that this isn't a technology problem. This is entirely about cultural change. It's about behavior change. This is changing mindsets. We have a mindset that we have created of closed by default. And as our natural reaction when we're trying to build a business, we think, what can we protect with IP? What can we keep as a competitive advantage? Or if we're working in the public sector, when we should really only share that information when it's perfect or when we've got really positive results out of it. And it's a really huge cultural shift to say open by default. And open by default is at the heart of the G8 Open Data Charter that was signed last year. So from my perspective, this is looking at what has the cultural shift been in, for example, the software industry from closed to open source and free software. And what's the cultural shift now from closed data to open data, and what's the impact of that going to be. And when we think about this in terms of scale, the amount of information that's being produced is doubling every couple of years. So if we fast forward 20, 25 years into the web of data, in my world, it'll be orders of magnitude greater than the web of documents is. So the amount of the world that's going to be instrumented, the number of people who are going to be producing data, whether it's a sensor on your phone or whether it's the transport systems and so on, the amount of information is going to be vastly greater than before. I want to switch now and talk a little bit about what we've been doing at the ODI. In our 18 months, we've reached over 400,000 people, and that's unique visitors to not just our website, but various assets that we've scattered across the web. We've trained over 300 people from 13 countries. We have built a network of over 100 organizations. We've got a corporate membership program with over 80 corporate members. And an international network, which I'll talk more about in a moment. But we've also helped unlock a lot of value in the ecosystem here. So this is also looking at the £2.5 million that the startups that we've been incubated have generated between them. But fundamentally, we're looking at impact. We want to see how do we address a triple bottom line set of values. So looking at social impact, the political rhetoric around openness and transparency as a public good, how can we build better services, how can we be more efficient, and how can we engage with the public better. But also looking at economic impacts, how do we create more jobs, how do we, if we're producing all this open data, if we're not creating open innovation from it, then we're really missing a trick. There are huge operational efficiencies to be gained here. I think we haven't even begun to scratch the surface of these. And then you look at the environmental impacts, and this isn't a fluffy thing. This is a really material. How are we going to deal with scarcity, water scarcity, for example? How are we going to deal with supply chain risk? In speaking with some of the insurance industry, they see the value of open data to them being worth billions, because if they can create a better risk model around international shipping, for example, then you completely change the way that that system works. How can we make a sustainable energy system in the UK? Well, currently the price of wind is too high. If we can create a better risk model around that, the insurance premium will come down, and that'll drive down the price of energy. So there's a lot of connected pieces here, and this is one of the real benefits, I think, of open data. Isn't just that you can look at one tiny shard of information, is that you can start linking it all together. So the kind of promises of linked data that have been brewing in academia for a long time, I think can be realized as we push out more open data. I'll just skip through some of these. So the things that we do at the ODI, we provide training, we're creating standards, we're building the evidence base, we're helping startups, and we put a huge amount of energy and investment into communication. We've probably spent more than £500,000 on communication in our first 18 months. That's resulted in some of the stories that I've been through, and the coverage of those stories on the front page of the Financial Times and The Economist, in all the broadsheets, and even in the tabloids in the UK. And looking more broadly internationally, we've got, over the last 8 months, we've spun up 20 franchises in 13 countries around the world. And that includes places that you might expect, like the US, Canada, around Europe, and places you might not expect, like Moscow, South Korea, Osaka, Buenos Aires, Dubai. So this is really, I want to paint a picture here, this is a really international movement. This is changing around the world. It's being driven partly politically, partly by technology, and partly just by the web. You know, this is a kind of, the genie is kind of out of the box, if you like, of the web. There is a set of forces that the web embodies that I think are pretty unstoppable in this context. One of the other pieces I mentioned, we have corporate members. We're working also with the World Bank. Our brief there is to train the world's politicians and national leaders in open data. We're doing this in developing economies. So just a couple of weeks ago, we helped Burkina Faso launch data.gov.bf, which is their first national open data portal. And we're doing work with Rwanda, with Botswana, and there's a whole list of countries that are coming to the table there. And I think there, again, this is part of democratizing access to information. And when you start publishing this as open data, what does opening up data about the London transportation system provide as benefit to someone who's just about to start designing their national transport structure? So I think there's a huge number of benefits there. The smart city agenda keeps coming up as an issue that this plays a central role in. And I'm just going to finish with a couple of calls to action. Firstly, if you're publishing data, or if you know anyone who's publishing data, we would like to strongly encourage the use of an open data certificate. This is free, self-certified. I was very fortunate to be able to launch it at the G8 last year. The data sets on data.gov.uk are all going to get a certificate. And this is moving forward from Tim's 5-star rating for open data, and it creates a machine-readable certificate at the end of it. At a basic level, it asks you what's the URL and how is it licensed. That's a critical question that people need to know in order to understand if they can use the data. But it also asks questions like, how long will you publish it for? Who do I contact if it breaks? So really specific data that helps users of that information understand how to use it. It doesn't get into any form of ontology. It doesn't get into any of the semantics of what the data is. But it really, this at scale will enable the discovery of data. So we'll be able to build, well, we've got a search engine on the data, help people use it, and help policymakers benchmark against the usage. And as you can see, there are 4 levels. And the final piece is tell us stories. If you're publishing data or you've got a good open data story, if you tell us, we can help disseminate that around the world. We've built an international network. Part of the reason for doing that is to share knowledge and share understanding. So one of the reasons we're very excited about working with the UK is to do this across all of the universities in the UK, and how can we create a fire hose of really great open data stories that give everybody the confidence to say, actually, this is fine, somebody's done this, I'm not going to lose my job, here's things that I can learn, and here's the benefit from doing so. So I'm going to stop there, and we can break for questions. Thank you very much.
That's a fantastic presentation. Plenty of very rich material, and I certainly got